Life doesn't move in straight lines. It twists, turns, and surprises us along the way. On Better Things Ahead, we talk with people who have walked those winding paths. Each story reminds us of the lessons, hope, and promise of better things ahead.
Welcome in. I'm Michael Estes. Today I'm joined by Matt Cloyd. Matt, welcome.
Thank you.
We are continuing our New Year's series. Today, it's going to be a little bit different than what we normally would do. A lot of times we talk about kind of how to make things better in the world around us and using those experiences to make things better. We are going to talk about something like that, but it's going to be a little bit more of a topic that's been in the news. We're going to think through an issue together as believers and hopefully have a clearer, better view on that issue. But it was born out of an experience that Matt had here in the last several weeks. And so, Matt, first of all, what Matt got to do was he got to go to Israel as a part of Student Leadership University. Is that correct?
It was through my relationships with Student Leadership University that I was invited to go.
And what did you do while you were there?
Yeah, so the whole idea of this trip was, and their kind of slogan was, the pulpit must speak louder than the propaganda. And so the nation of Israel, specifically the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, working with a U.S. organization called Friends of Zion, in collaboration, they wanted to bring a group of pastors from different denominations, but evangelical pastors, over to Israel to hear from government officials, to see some of the sites where some of the recent conflict stuff has been going on, and just have an opportunity to learn and know exactly what is really going on in Israel, compared to maybe what we're hearing in the media or seeing, or big talking heads kind of giving strong opinions on this and that, and kind of their whole agenda was for us to see truth and see facts, so we could make informed, educated decisions on things and be able to publicly address some of those things that may not be entirely truthful in the media.
Sure. So this wasn't your first time in Israel, was it?
No, this is actually my second time in Israel, and so the first time was with Student Leadership University.
Gotcha.
So I'd taken a student through that.
That's the last year of that program.
That's right.
It's when it's safe enough to be there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so they'll alternate. In times of conflict, they'll do like a Greece trip, and they'll kind of walk through the steps of Paul.
Yeah.
But when there's not a conflict, then they'll do the Holy Land, and we'll go to Israel and Jordan to kind of walk through the Bible and kind of walk through significant points throughout that. And so it's interesting. And so, and then they do kind of leadership. It's a leadership conference, so they're teaching the students about all that, throughout. And so it's very interesting, and, had a great time there. And this trip was very different,
Sure.
While you're not necessarily, you still went to some of the sites, and did some of that. That wasn't, of course, the point of this trip. And so it was interesting. And then of course, I'll circle back to this probably at the end, just to kind of remind everyone, but what was interesting, this kind of goes with our New Year's theme, is kind of developing a willingness to go and willingness to do things.
Yeah.
Because I can't remember which episode it was, but there was an episode where we were talking about something. I can't remember what it was.
We do talk about things.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We were talking about something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we were talking.
Yeah.
And I specifically made the comment that I keep my passport with me.
Yeah.
So that way, anytime something comes up, I'm ready to go. And I kind of had this willingness. God opens a door, I'm going to walk through it. It was literally the next day after recording that episode that I got an email for this trip. And originally this trip was scheduled for September, and then due to the conflict and all those kinds of things, just, it ended up getting pushed to December. But, I think kind of as you're going into this new year, I would encourage anyone, to approach life with that, and expect God to open doors and be ready for those doors to open. So that way, whatever it looks like, whether it's a trip, an opportunity, whatever, walk through those doors. And I've tell people all the time that the way I approach life in general is that God opens a door, I'm going to keep walking through that door until it gets closed. And so, I'm just a very willing, like somebody, creates an opportunity, something, I'm willing to go and do, you know, and then if God closes the door, I want him to be the one to close the door rather than myself be the one to close the door. And so that's kind of how all of this worked out and kind of aligned. And when I first heard about the opportunity to go, that was my whole desire, was I wanted facts, because you started hearing a lot about what was going on with this, you know, this conflict that's, you know, going on right now between Hamas and Israel. And I was starting to get kind of conflicted in knowing, like, well, you know, what like, it has Israel gone too far? Are they doing things that maybe United Nations would consider as war crimes, or you know, all these kinds of things? And so I was starting to get concerned, and I didn't know the answer. You know? And then, as we mentioned, it's kind of a hot button topic.
Yeah, it is.
And you can get on social media, and there's people who are very anti-Israel, very, you know, publicly, you know, that, you know, and disagree with how they've handled this conflict and things. And so I wanted to go, because as pastors, we get questions, and people say, hey, how do you, you know, do you support this or support that? You know, I want to have a very good understanding of what really is going on.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to go, you know, and so I think the trip allowed me to do that.
Yeah. So one thing I want to say before we jump too deep into the details of your trip, because I want you to be able to share a bunch about what you learned while you were there, that sort of thing, is I want to caution our listeners in the sense of, we as believers aren't called to try to fix everything everywhere around the world all the time. Like, one of the things that social media tricks us into believing is that we need to have an opinion on everything, and we can know the facts of everything through the medium of social media. And the truth of the matter is, like, it would be unwise as a believer to think that people don't have agendas on social media. It would be unwise for us, and that can be in either direction. It can be a lot of different ways, but it's unwise for us to look at the world around us and think that the world system has not been affected by spiritual warfare. It has not. It would be unwise for us to believe that the enemy hasn't held sway over certain areas of the world and social media and that sort of thing. And so, like, for us, I think we should always be relatively skeptical when we see things on social media. I don't know if you would disagree with that or not, but I would say that probably should be our first stance toward information that we get through social media. And two, it's okay if we decide that we can opt out of a situation that's not directly impacting the people that are right around us. So, like, not every one of us is going to be called to go to Israel and do things, or go be called to fight in various areas of the world, you know, culture wars, if you want to call them that sort of thing. But a lot of us are going to be called to minister to our neighbor, to take care of the person that we run into at the gas station, to pray for our server at our restaurant, whatever. Like, so we should be ready always for that sort of thing. We don't have to be social media warriors. And so I think we need to be careful about how we approach things like this, and have a very balanced and clear view on some of these things, but also realize that, like, it may be hard for us to get the information that we need to make an informed opinion about something. So I actually appreciate the fact that you're going to be able to tell us firsthand some of the things that you saw, that will help, hopefully, some of us make up our mind about, you know, the way we should view something. It may not give us necessarily a call to action specifically, but it will be informed, and that's good. So I would encourage you guys, like, don't feel like it's important to be a keyboard warrior, social media warrior. It's important for you to love your neighbor, and those are the people that are really close to you. And if you happen to be in Israel, those are the people that are really close to you. So tell me a little bit about your interactions with the people that you had while you were in Israel. Who did you interact with first? I think it's first.
So, you know, essentially, the trip, we interacted with a lot of different individuals. We interacted with some individuals that were survivors of the different, you know, terrorist attack, and I'll get into that as far as what actually kicked this specific conflict off. But we met with some survivors from that. We met with hostages who had been in captivity, some for, you know, 400 or 500 days, and so we got to hear from them. We got to hear from government officials and kind of hear their strategy and what they're doing, what they're going into. We got to hear from military leaders. We actually went to a military base and got briefed on the situation, and they showed us video footage that has since been recovered by, Israeli intelligence. And so we got to see, footage of some of the terrorist attack stuff, whether it be like kind of dash cam footage from vehicles, whether it was videos that the terrorists themselves recorded. And so was able to witness all of that specifically. And then we also got to hear from Mike Huckabee, who is the U.S. ambassador to Israel, so we got to hear from him. And so really we got to hear from a lot of different people who, who lost loved ones, people who were hostages, people who survived attacks, military leaders who are carrying out the, military operations, as well as government leaders who are essentially, issuing those orders. And so really got to hear from all sorts of people that had firsthand accounts of some of that. And so it was very interesting.
So, what are a few of the big takeaways that you had from the people you heard from?
Yeah. So I would say, first, and part of it is because never been great at keeping up with current events a whole lot. Like, I'll hear about things in the news, but I'm not one who actively pursues like, oh, what is this conflict? What is this going on all over the world, and kind of knowing all those things. And so, with the initial event that kind of kicked this conflict off on October 7th, 2023, you had a terrorist attack, the Hamas organization out of the Gaza Strip or Gaza envelope, as it's referred to. They attacked a music festival. And so, I knew that's kind of what started, but I didn't know like the details of it. And so being able to hear about the brutality and the, I guess the strategy of that terrorist organization that they carried out that day to implement as much devastation and harm as possible. And then hearing from individuals who either survived or were taken hostage, or family members of those who were murdered in that. It just, it kind of stood out about, I guess I didn't realize how devastating that attack was. That kind of kicked all of this off. And so being able to hear from, firsthand and being on site, we were there. It was called the Nova Festival. And we were on site at this, location where it started. And then there were several other communities around the area that was attacked that same day as well. It was a very targeted, attack that Hamas, carried out. And so it was very interesting to kind of hear and better understand what started it all. And then also, the flip side was also understanding why it's continued. It's because they took hostages. And Israel, their government officials, military leaders, everyone that we talked to, that's been their thing, is they've wanted to, of course, disarm a terrorist organization, and they've wanted to recover their hostages. And they've made it very clear, the moment they receive their hostages back, the conflict is over. And so if they would have just returned all the hostages October 8th, this would not have been a essentially 2-year war now. Because that was their agenda, and that's what they wanted. And so every military strike has been to either disarm a terrorist organization or to go in and, recover hostages to the best of their ability. And of course, as we know, war is ugly, no matter which way you look at it. But that was some of the things that kind of really stood out in some of those conversations.
What as you spent time with the people there, what was kind of within the areas that you were in, what was the interaction like between different groups of people? For those who don't know, Israel is not a homogenous place. There's lots of different religious groups within Israel. There's lots of different types of people that live there. It's not just Jewish people. And so, what was that?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah. So, so that brings up a great point. In Israel, you have, of course, you have the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
If you're a citizen of Israel,
Geographic nation of Israel.
that's right.
Yeah.
And if you are a citizen of that nation, you are Israeli. Well, they'll make distinctions between Jews. Where you're a Jewish Israeli or you're an Arab Israeli, and this is to help individuals to maintain their personal beliefs while still being part of a nation. It's a democratic nation,
Yeah.
And so they don't require every citizen of Israel to be Jewish. Our group specifically, we had our tour guide. She was Jewish. Not necessarily practicing, but has heritage as far as that goes. We had a security guard who was, somewhat practicing, not ultra Orthodox or anything like that. Then we had our bus driver who was Arab, Muslim. And so we got to hear from all three of those individuals and kind of hear from, them, and them recognize that the problem is not each other. And that was one thing that helped me as far as clarity goes, is going into it. I kind of felt like this was just another Israel or, Jewish people versus the Palestinians and this sort of conflict, but that's not what it is. It's Israel, the nation, whether you're Jewish or Arab, Muslim, against a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
And so that was very interesting to hear from them, and they all corporately said, we're not the problem. It's not us. It's this extreme, wing of, Islam, and this extreme wing it's a terrorist organization. They are the problem. It's not us, conflicting with each other, and so they, in general, a Jew, a Muslim, a Christian, they can get along within the nation of Israel. So that was interesting. And now that's not to say every group has extremes, right?
Yep.
There was one specific day we were walking through the old city, and it was Sabbath, and you had these teenage boys, Jewish boys. They were your traditional, Jewish boys practicing the Sabbath. Well, they were in the Muslim quarter. And in this Muslim quarter, they were doing their Sabbath kind of song and dance, holding hands and doing this there. And essentially, what they were doing was trying to incite a riot, because teenage boy knuckleheads, right? It doesn't change.
Doesn't matter where you live.
Doesn't matter where you live, And so, but they were doing this Jewish song and dance right in the middle of the Muslim quarter, trying to stir up something, right? And so I said to say, like, you got problem people everywhere.
Yeah.
But in general, that's not what this conflict was about. This conflict was about the events of October 7th that, have now lingered, throughout while they've attempted to eradicate a terrorist organization.
Yeah. Yeah. So, was there anything that you found out that you weren't really expecting to find out? Was there something that stuck out to you that surprised you more than anything else in your interactions?
I probably go back, kind of the brutality of that October 7th attack, because again, I didn't know about that event as well as I probably should have, and but then again, probably didn't know about it as well as I could have until I actually got to hear from people. Yeah. But essentially, what happened was you had this music festival. Here in America, we have one similar. It's called Bonnaroo.
Yeah.
And you have this music festival where I think 3,000 to 4,000 kids, basically, they're college age, kids, go to this music festival, and it's a whole thing. They got concerts, of course, it's partying,
It's a secular event. I mean, and I don't mean that to be self-righteous or anything like that. It's not meant to be a religious event at all.
That's right. And so you have people from all different backgrounds, all different walks of life. At the specific event, you had Jewish people, you had Muslims, you had Christians, you had, non-religious people. You had all these people that go to this music festival to have a good time, right? It's party, and very, like you said, very worldly event where it's, that party lifestyle. But the whole idea of the festival is to show love and support in this community of people. And so you have 3,000 to 4,000 people that typically attend this event. Well, in the early morning, before some of the next, concerts were supposed to begin, I think it was shortly, right around 6:30 in the morning, you had this event that, essentially the Hamas terrorist organization in Gaza implemented their attack. They began, sending mortars, and they had people, militants going into this music festival. And as they went into this music festival, and again, they were trying to kill as many people as possible. They also targeted other communities, so what they call a kibbutz, which are these small kind of communities that surrounded that area that are right there on the border of Gaza. But with this attack, they had all these targeted, agendas. Basically, you went into this, music festival, you're attacking, you're trying to kill, again, civilians. These are just college kids looking to have a good time.
Yeah.
And that's who is attacked. It wasn't military officials. It wasn't government officials. It wasn't Jews. It wasn't, anything like that. It was innocent civilians that were attacked. And throughout the whole events of October 7th, you ended up having, over 1,200 people that were killed in this. Of those 1,200, I think just over 800 were civilians. So it shows you, 3/4 of the people that were killed in this attack were civilians. Women, kids, people from, I think there were 68 people that were from foreign nations. 46 of those were Americans. 40 kids were killed in these attacks, and just brutal. So the way it kind of started was you had this music festival that was attacked. Well, I think we have a map. We'll pull up a map so you can kind of see. But basically, you had the central point of the Nova Festival, this music festival. Well, you have I was going to say highway, but it's more of a road, kind of a 2-lane road. I think it's called, is it Road 232? Is that right? Can we see it on the map? I think it's 232. Basically, it's a road. It's a one-way in, one-way out of this area.
Yep.
And so what they did was they attacked this. Well, they had militants along this road. So anytime someone tried to escape or leave by driving, out of this area, what do? Now they're positioned to lay fire on any vehicle that's leaving.
Yeah.
And while we were there, we got to see these vehicles, and got to see the, devastation that they would have faced. And so basically that's what they were doing. And so what happens is now you execute these vehicles that are trying to escape, execute the driver. Well, now these cars are creating a roadblock. So now everyone is trapped. Here's a picture of a couple of the vehicles that were recovered at the event, and you're able to see the bullet holes. They were clearly targeting the driver. And so you see stuff like that was kind of going on. And so you had that going on at the music festival. Then you had the, as I mentioned, the communities, the kibbutz communities that were also attacked. There was one specifically, or really all of them. They would go in, they would attack the residents. They would shoot at any pets. They would shoot at the houses, cars, shooting and trying to destroy anything they could. And, through that, there was one specific that, Be'eri, I believe is how it's pronounced. But this particular one, you had 42 women that were killed. You had 10 kids that were killed. You had 45 people that were 65 and older that were killed. You had, the youngest victim in that village was a 9-month-old. The oldest was an 88-year-old. And so you see that was the stuff that was carried out by these terrorists on October 7th. And, like I said before, like over 1,200 people were killed. over, I think just under 15,000 people were injured in all of these attacks. 252 people were taken hostage, 90 of which were women. About 30 or so were children. And so it was, again, a targeted attack with the intent of complete devastation. And, that was the events of October 7th. I didn't realize the magnitude of that, and so when you hear some of those things and you start recognizing, the evil that was, brought upon that nation on that day, you start to realize, okay, what would lead to a response? Again, others may disagree or, all those kinds of things, but like for me, I try to compartmentalize and kind of make comparisons and figure out, while it's different, I would still say it's comparable to our 9/11, where it was a very intentional, targeted attack against civilians.
Yeah.
And essentially, it affected, I think, not only in that one community, but the other kibbutzes that were around the area. 150,000 people were evacuated, and even up, 6 months after the event, majority of those were still displaced. And so when you look at everyone who is impacted, all the injuries, all the death, and everything like that, it made up for close to 2% of their population that was directly affected at this event. Our 9/11 was like, if you calculate that to our population, I mean, it's like hundredths, maybe thousandths of a percentage. And so when you think about, kind of looking at that ratio, this event was devastating to a nation, and you would expect some type of response. And you have, they showed us, footage of the hostages. Some of the hostages were taken alive. Some of the hostages were taken, they were already dead, but they intentionally took those hostages with the intent of, they're going to want these bodies back, because, especially if they were Jewish, because, Jewish have certain beliefs as far as some of that goes. And so they took dead bodies with them to intentionally have leverage on for future negotiations, and that was the whole reason. And so just the devastation of that event is kind of probably what surprised me the most. And, I knew about the event, but didn't really know, quite the devastation, because you hear about the Iron Dome and how it protects, against mortar attacks and things like that. And while it did, the weight of this and the military personnel that were, on the ground attacking just, wasn't, Israel's defense didn't stand a chance in that moment. And so we got to hear from one kid who was at the music festival. And he was one who actually escaped the festival. And then he, he and a bunch of friends, they worked their way out and then ended up getting back in, and, weren't able to get out. So they ended up traveling on feet, and they worked their way away from that festival as long as they could, and kind of found a thicket to kind of hide in. And they hid in that thicket until the next morning, or I think they said it was about 2:00 that afternoon. So, essentially 8 hours after the initial attack, they were hiding in this thicket until finally they had a friend who was also in that thicket. Their phone was being, the Find My feature, and they had a friend come and rescue them. And so they had a little oh gosh, I forgot the car, but it was one of those little tiny compact cars, and 13 of them piled in this vehicle to escape. And so got to kind of hear from him, and it was his first time really talking through and processing that information. And so it was just kind of sad to hear from that. We heard from a dad whose son was at the festival, who was actually military personnel. Well, something else, instinct, right? If you're getting attacked, you go to the bomb shelters, right? Well, the terrorists knew that's where they would go. So what do? They have militants stationed to go in and just execute the people in these bomb shelters. So this father's son was there, and he gets to one. He said there were 20 or 30 people in this small little bomb shelter, and he said I'm military, I'm IDF, I'm going to do everything I can to help. And so he did, and they were throwing grenades into this bomb shelter, and he was grabbing the grenades and throwing them back to at least defend as long as he could. Eventually, they had an RPG, and they shot him with an RPG, and killed most of the people in that shelter. The only ones that survived hid under the dead bodies. And so you got to hear stories as far as that goes. And so it was just a completely devastating event that kicked all of this off. And so helping me recognize the devastation that occurred there helped me get a better understanding of why this conflict has been going on and why it has continued now. Here we are 2 years later.
Yeah. That's some heavy stuff, some difficult stuff, man, as far as... It's one of those things where, you hear about stuff kind of indirectly a lot of times in these situations. I mean, 9/11 was a direct experience for a bunch of us. We saw the original news footage. We were, living in I was living in Mississippi at the time, and close enough to feel the weight of that. Yeah. I can only imagine what it would be like in a much smaller geopolitical area that is Israel. And the response of Americans after 9/11 was like, we have to defend ourselves. We have to protect ourselves. We have to do something about this. And so I'm not surprised that that would be the response of a nation like Israel. I guess the last big question I have is, if you had somebody come to you and say, what should we do about this? Or what should we do with the information that you shared with us? Yeah. What would you tell them?
Yeah. So... First and foremost, I would say pray, for this nation.
I would include pray for everybody in that area, because they're all affected by terrorist organizations and that sort of thing. Like, even if they have no stake in that terrorist organization, they're going to be affected by the impact of what those people do.
Yeah. Oh, so, for sure. Yeah. Pray for that region. Pray for, pray for Israel as, they are kind of walking through this process and figuring out what this looks like and their next steps, all those kinds of things. And so first and foremost, pray, and, Scripture specifically tells us, and there's several passages that talks about praying specifically for Jerusalem and those kinds of things. And so regardless of the geopolitical landscape, we should, pray for that region, for sure. The second thing I would recommend people to do is kind of like what you said earlier, is be very cautious on not only social media, but media in general.
Sure. Yeah.
You've recently had several, very public, media people who have come out openly opposing Israel and even bringing up some conspiracy theory type stuff. Yeah. And it's like, be very careful on what you're hearing as far as that goes. And then I think, the other thing would be to, recognize and, when you find that truth, kind of recognize that the intent, behind this, Israel's response has not been to criticize or not criticize, but not to attack civilians or anything like that. War is ugly. War is going to lead to civilian casualties. But, I was assured by military personnel, our security guard, who his job specifically was to go into these places where they were doing a targeted attack. He was an explosive engineer. So his job was to figure out how to destroy a building to minimize, collateral damage. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, he assured, that's all they do not want to kill civilians. They do not want to hurt anyone, who is innocent. They've brought food in, they've brought support, they brought medical, they've done all these things to try to help civilians in those regions. Their goal is to extinguish a terrorist organization. And so I would, say that. And then on top of that is be careful to not allow, whether we might have some individuals who agree, disagree, whatever, but don't allow those things to work its way into your art, into someone's heart to become anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. You can disagree with a nation, you can disagree with a, any nation for that matter.
Yeah.
However, Israel's one of those places that, throughout history, we've seen, it quickly turn into a hate against a people.
Yeah.
And so I would caution people against that, and really check yourself as far as that goes, because again, we as followers of Christ, we should show love to those in those communities, and we should show our support in that way. And so also I'd say just be very careful, because even as of recording this, there was a attack in Australia, within the past 24 hours, stemming from anti-Semitism. And so you see some of those things, and, hate has no place anywhere, whether you agree, disagree, or anything like that. And so those are some of the things that I would say is, of course, pray for the area, pray for Israel specifically, pray for the region, pray for everyone impacted there. Get your facts, recognize that a lot of times public media people, they're trying to get clicks and views and, trying to get a following. Be very careful of that. And then recognize that, we got to be very careful and check our hearts to make sure we're not showing hate towards any group of people. Even post 9/11, you saw that, and you've seen that throughout history, right? Post 9/11, you have this rise in fear of Muslims, and you started seeing Americans, expressing hate and things like that towards the Muslims, because of what a radical group did.
Right.
And so we have to kind of check ourselves in that, and throughout history, of course, you see that periodically. You see that with Israel. You see, what happened in World War II, and very easily, we don't realize how easy it is for us to go to that place of hate and, prejudice and racism and those kinds of things. And so we just need to be very careful in that, and recognize that, they are created by God, and whether you agree or disagree with the politics or things like that, same thing in our country, right? We've dealt with hateful attacks and murders and school shootings and, attacks on political figures and things like that, strictly out of hate, and so we as followers of Christ have to do better and very publicly speak out against those things. Here in this specific instance, we're talking about Israel and talking about the events that they faced and, the anti-Semitism that they're facing right now on a worldwide scale because of false media. But in any given time, we got to make sure we're showing, compassion and love to all people, with our desire to see all people come to know Christ. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good word. Thank you for your time. Sure. Appreciate you sharing what you found out. I guess if you have more questions about that, if you've listened to this and you're just curious to learn more, I would encourage you guys to reach out to Matt. And I'm sure he'd love to talk to you more about what he learned and go into more detail. I would say, one of the things I echo his concern is realizing that we as believers battle against powers and principalities. It's not about individuals that we look at and target and scapegoat. It's we're not interested in that. We're interested in understanding that every person that we come in contact with is created in the image of God and needs a relationship with Jesus. That's the primary need of every human heart. And it's our job as believers to help them find that and to love them into those relationships as best we can. So I want to encourage you. Make that the basically the heartbeat of your life, and you'll go in the right direction. Don't stress too much if you can't find out all the facts because you don't have the right avenues for that. Pray and trust God to deal with those things because some of those things we can't deal with. And so I want to encourage you, don't let this be a source of anxiety, but instead a place where you can pray and love those around you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us on Better Things Ahead. Follow the show on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video of our podcast. Until next time, keep moving forward because there are always better things ahead.